today we have Libbie McNamee, and Libbie is a public speaker, historical fiction author, my favorite part here, recovering lawyer, and former Army JAG with tours in Bosnia, South Korea, and Tacoma, Washington. She lives in Richmond, Virginia with her husband and history guru's son. She is the author of award-winning Susanna's Midnight Ride, The Girl Who Won the Revolutionary War, and Dolly Madison and the War of 1812, as well as co-editor of The Epic Story of 1776, 25 People, 13 Colonies, and 1 War. This is exciting news. She is currently working on her 3rd novel about Elizabeth Van Lew, leader of a powerful Union spy ring in Richmond, who reported directly to General Grant during the Civil War. You can sign up for her monthly newsletter, and you can find her on Facebook and Instagram. After the lecture today, she has a table with books that you can purchase, and I hope that you will take the time to at least look at them. So, knowing that she has a 3rd novel, I think we can hopefully expect her, when that's completed, at another season. So, Libbie McNamee, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Susan. I have a little gift for you. I just wanted to give you a mug. Thank you for coordinating.
Thank you.
The work this woman puts into organizing just my event is amazing.
Thank you.
But anyway, it's always an honor to be here, and I don't believe in reincarnation, but if I did, I would think that at some past life I lived in Hopewell, because whenever I come here, I feel like I'm coming home. We are here to discuss a man by the name of Marie-Joseph Paul Yves Roche Gibert du Moitié, Le Marquis de Lafayette, but we will call him Lafayette for short, because that's quite a mouthful. He said, "It's not my fault I was baptized like a Spaniard, with the name of every conceivable saint who might offer me protection in battle." Now, Lafayette was born in 1757 as a rural nobleman, and he came from a long line of nobility and soldiers. His father died when he was only 2 years old in the Battle of Minden. Excuse me, I'm sorry. His father died when he was just 2 years old in the Battle of Minden. So from a very, very early age, he learned to hate the British a lot, which plays in greatly in his future endeavors. So he ends up inheriting some wealth, but when he is 12, his mother and his grandmother both pass away. And he is an orphan, which is very sad, but it also makes him incredibly wealthy. And they were basically a remote noble family. So like, if we had nobility in America, it would be like a noble family from Kansas. But all of a sudden, because he was an only child on both sides, all of a sudden, he was basically one of the wealthiest young men in Europe at age 12, and inherited the title of Marquis de Lafayette. And but before his mother and grandmother passed away, they arranged a marriage with a very, very elite family called the Nouy family. They didn't have quite as much money. You know, we're talking difference between, you know, Rockefeller and, Donald Trump, not to mention a contentious name. So they left an arranged marriage. So for him, so he married a young lady named Adrienne of the Nouy family, very elite family. And at that point, Louis XVI was a brand new young man and the new king from the Bourbon dynasty, and married Marie Antoinette from Austria. So they got married when he was only 16 years old. And if you think that's young, think about the fact that she was only 14 years old. So despite all that, they really, really fell in love and loved each other deeply, and had an amazing marriage throughout their entire lives. So Lafayette ended up becoming a courtier at Versailles. And there he is in one of the most lavish places in the entire world, basically wearing beautiful clothing, eating amazing food, and hobnobbing with the dignitaries from all over France. And he longed for more because he came from this family of the military nobility. So he had ancestors who fought for Joan of Arc, and he had ancestors who were knights during the Crusades. And he longed to do something. He wanted to live up to his ancestors, and he wanted to make his name known. And there he is in 1775, he's a teenager, and he's having dinner with King George's brother, who's the Duke of Gloucester. That's how connected he was. And King George the Duke of Gloucester was talking about what had happened in Lexington and Concord. And the shot heard round the world. So let's just say that Lafayette heard the shot himself all the way in France. And he said, "When I heard of the quarrel, my heart was enlisted, and I thought of nothing but joining the colors." So he was all in. He thought, this is my big chance. This is my big adventure. He's a big believer in liberty, and he wanted nothing more to join the Americans. So he joined. He talked to King George, the new Louis XVI, asked his permission to go help America. And Louis XVI said in no uncertain terms, no. And he even issued an edict saying that all the French were forbidden from participating and helping the colonists, and even specifically mentioned his name, Lafayette's name. Like, Lafayette, you are not allowed to go. Lafayette had this, his philosophy, how he lived his life. It was called cur non, which is Latin for why not. So there he is. He's a teenager. He's got more money than he can do anything with. He's looking for an adventure, so he escapes to Spain. He has a ship built for him called, of course, La Victoire, victory. And he ends up escaping. He dresses as a woman and gets onto the ship. There are even British boats that are patrolling, trying to catch him. So he jumps on this ship, and he doesn't tell anyone. Doesn't even tell his wife, who is pregnant. And they already have a toddler. So he just takes off because he knows that Louis XVI is going to grill his wife, and he wants her to honestly be able to say she has no idea what happened. So he gets on this ship, he learns English en route, and he is seasick for the 3 months coming over to America. And I'm sure he was thinking, what in the world am I doing? And this is a great quote from him: "Determination is enough to overcome adversity." So he was still pining away for this great adventure. So he lands in South Carolina, and apparently some people, the first people that saw him mistook him for the British and almost shot him. So imagine, he's sneaking out, he's broken the law, he's abandoned his pregnant wife, and he's learned English, he's been seasick, and this is the welcome he gets. And then he has to make his way all the way from South Carolina to Philadelphia to try to meet General Washington. So when you think about how arduous that journey was, and it was July, and there was no air conditioning, of course. So he gets all the way to Philadelphia, and the George Washington, the founding fathers were like, okay, that's really nice of you to offer, but we're good, we're fine. Because they'd had so many of these useless royals from France volunteer to come over, and they wanted big titles, and they wanted big money, and the Americans didn't have, any money to offer them. But then Lafayette mentioned the magic word, free. He would work for free. And George Washington said, well, as a matter of fact, maybe we do have room for you. And all of a sudden he's made he was a captain over in France. All of a sudden he's a major general. And he's got no battle experience, and they don't really trust him. He's a major general with no troops under him. I mean, when has that ever happened? But they thought, well, it's free. The army's been decimated by smallpox. We're about to lose Philadelphia, and why not? Turn on, why not? Give this guy a chance. Because that was really the dream for the Patriots, was to get help from France. So they thought, well, we're not going to lose anything. So then in September, there's the Battle of Brandywine. And so Washington lets him participate, and Lafayette was just amazing. He pitched right in. He was, all in. He even was shot in the left leg, and he didn't even realize it. And he had blood spurting out of his tall boot, and somebody else had to tell him that he'd been shot. And he was organizing a retreat, and just absolutely amazing. So that's when he really became America's favorite fighting Frenchman, that people were just like, wow, this guy's for real. He's just not this pretty boy from France. So it really changed everyone's opinion of him, and the disdain that George Washington had turned to love. And when finally when the battle was over, George Washington referred Lafayette to his own personal doctor and said, please treat him like he's my son. And at that point, they really forged a deep relationship, a father-son relationship that lasted through their lives. So, George Washington had stepchildren, but he didn't have any biological children of his own. And of course, Lafayette had a big void in his life from losing his father when he was so young. So then Lafayette pitches in, he stays at Valley Forge. I mean, think how wealthy this guy is, and he's living there just like everyone else. Not enough blankets, not enough food, they're freezing, and they're trying to train up the army and turn everyone around. And Lafayette ended up working a lot with the Oneida Indians in the area. And that's what was neat about Lafayette, is he really was open to learning from anyone. There was no pretension. He was very self-deprecating, which I love about him. And so he learned from the Oneida Indians a lot of their tactics on battle, of kind of jumping into, taking some action or shooting bows and arrows and then going off. Whereas the British, historically, it was always, you line up in your bright red uniforms and you start firing right at each other from, feet, feet apart. So he took that training, and which heated him well later on. So as they came out of Valley Forge, by the spring of 1778, Lafayette had, participated in really training up the, turning the entire American army around into a real fighting force. So he ends up going back to France, and at this point we had won the Battle of Saratoga, and he was able to convince Louis XVI, hey, look at this, we're on the right side. Because before this, Louis XVI didn't want to get involved. They were still trying to pay off the French and Indian War. They'd been at war with Britain forever, and the last thing he wanted to do was get involved in another war. But then he thought, oh, well, Saratoga, hey, these Americans, they could pull this off. So sure, why don't we just jump in and, hey, it'd be fun to trounce the British with them and take all the credit. So Louis XVI jumped in and offered, with great persistence of Lafayette, offered 6,000 soldiers and 6 ships headed for Chesapeake Bay, and as well as uniforms and arms and more money. So, oh, great, thank you. Okay. Awesome. Thank you for your patience, everyone. That's first slide. There's Lafayette holding court at Versailles. Wishing he was somewhere else because it just wasn't cool enough for him. Or adventurous enough. And there's Adrian, and there's La Victoire. And it's funny, the Victoire dropped him off, and then on the way back it sank. So it was a one-way ticket for Lafayette. And here he is meeting Washington in Philadelphia in July 1777. And here he is, wounded at the Battle of Brandywine. And here, this is actually from the Art Museum in Colonial Williamsburg. I saw it there. I'd never seen it before. I just thought it was so beautiful, of Washington and Lafayette. And here he is at Valley Forge with Washington. Okay, so, all right, great. Okay, so he goes back. To, as I said, he went back to France, got all this incredible support from Louis XVI, using high pressure tactics. Oh, and he was put on house arrest for a few days, basically so the king could save face. But because he had been so successful in America, that it was kind of all forgotten and everything was wonderful. So, so he got away with that. But at first he had to go apologize to the king. And then when he was came back to America, he landed in Boston, and he was feted, and thousands and thousands of people turned out, but George Washington ended up sending him to Virginia, which at this point was very sleepy. There was really nothing going on during the American Revolution here to this point, other than Great Bridge at the very beginning. And I'm sure Lafayette must have been very disappointed, because all the action was looked to be in New York, because that's where General Washington was. He was up there and waiting to overtake New York, and he was really fixated on that. So then he sent Lafayette down here to Virginia to try to capture Benedict Arnold. But basically, by the time Benedict Arnold got down here, the British had already sent him back up north, because the British didn't trust him either. So, go figure. So then when, of course, I've got to touch on Susanna's Midnight Ride, our local story here, that when Susanna Bowling here in good old City Point was, home, her brothers had been fighting in Guilford Courthouse, and General Cornwallis came up from the south as part of the British Southern Army and quartered at her family's home, and she overheard his plans to capture Lafayette. So she ended up sneaking out of her house and warning Lafayette, and the rest, as they say, is history. But Lafayette was really the mastermind behind the Battle of Yorktown, and he was there. He saw this opportunity because after Susanna warned him about Cornwallis coming to get him, he played cat and mouse using the tactics he learned at Valley Forge from the Oneida Indians. He said, I'm not strong enough to get beat. So he would just he and his men would kind of pop out of the woods and take a couple pot shots at the British, who were like dying in their wool uniforms, and these British guys who were not used to the boggy heat and humidity. So Cornwallis, one of my favorite quotes is, he said, I'd rather go to hell than go back to the Carolinas, because he just hated the humidity and all of that. So absolutely hilarious. And let's see, sorry, distracting myself. The Battle of Yorktown. He's a mastermind behind the Battle of Yorktown. But what's amazing too is that he was in there, and Cornwallis, when he went in there, didn't even bother building up any fortifications, because he was just waiting for ships to get back to New York, where the real battle was going to be. And he thought, oh, these lame Americans, we don't need to bother with that. Plus, they were exhausted. Lafayette had warned them out. So there they were in Yorktown, and just thinking, we're out of here. And lo and behold, Lafayette's plan all came together with the 6 ships coming that Louis XVI had sent at his insistence, and the Battle of the Capes and the Battle of Yorktown. So really, without Lafayette, the Battle of Yorktown never would have happened. And George Washington really didn't even want to come. And Lafayette finally was like, I got these ships coming. I got Cornwallis trapped. You better get down here. And he waited. He waited for Washington. He wanted Washington to get the credit. And that is what I find so amazing, because he could have gone ahead with the battle. They were trapped, and he waited for Washington. And just an amazing show of his incredible character that goes on throughout his life, of him doing the right thing when it would be a lot easier and perhaps more beneficial to him to just kind of go with the flow and take all the credit himself. So, amazing guy. So, this is with the Lafayette reenactor at Colonial Williamsburg. There's a Lafayette Day on March 14th, and there's always a celebration in Richmond. So it's a really fun day. So here we are, it's the Battle of Yorktown, Lafayette's mastermind. And so Lafayette heads home in December 1781. Here he is like, man, I cleaned up. Like, this is awesome. He's in his early 20s. He's this huge war hero. They're calling him the hero of two worlds. I mean, life is good for Lafayette, and his wife doesn't hate him for taking off. And so he goes back to France. France is a mess. They're still paying off the 7 Years' War. Now they're paying off the American Revolution. They are totally bankrupt. And let's see. Sorry about that. Let's see. So Lafayette goes back to France. There's all this unrest. And this is called the Ancien Regime. And these 3 estates. So, sorry, it's a little fuzzy. The first estate is the clergy. The second estate is the nobility. So Lafayette is part of the nobility. And the third estate is everyone else. And guess what? The first 2 estates pay no taxes. And the third estate of everyone else pays 50% of the taxes. And they were taxed on how many windows they had. They were taxed on how much food they bought. They were taxed if they bought food the year before and they still had it. I mean, these people could not catch a break. So, just absolutely insane. And needless to say, they were pretty tired of it. So Lafayette finds himself caught between 2 worlds. He is all for personal liberty and individual rights and not having this, basically antiquated system. So he ends up he's siding with the third estate here. And because Louis XVI is so desperate, he has to call in the National Assembly. And the National Assembly had not been called in for over 100 years because it was basically just going to stir up trouble with the third estate. But he was so desperate for money that he had to do it. So Lafayette ends up brokering a deal with the third estate, and they leave and they create this whole agreement. And the rest of them lock them out, and they end up on a tennis court. Of course, it's France. They're on a tennis court, and they vow that they will not leave until there's an agreement. All these members of the third estate and Lafayette. So they strong-arm them into reforming the government. And Lafayette writes the first draft of it's called the Declaration of the Rights of Man, which is one of the most important documents in history, along with the Magna Carta, because it really changed the monarchy to liberalism and starts the Enlightenment, the ideas of individual worth and getting rid of the monarchy. So he establishes a constitutional monarchy, is what he suggests, that you have the monarch still, but they're ceremonial, and that their third estate will take control of the country. And, he thinks, well, this is going to work out well. Well, 3 days later, the people are like, dang, that is not enough. We like our kings, with their heads cut off. And that's how we like our kings now. So they storm the Bastille, which is a symbol of repression and all of that. They storm the Bastille, now still celebrated on July 14th as Bastille Day. They storm the Bastille, and the French Revolution has begun. And there is Lafayette quaking in the middle. And the poor guy, it only gets worse for Lafayette. But he does manage to get the key to the Bastille, and he sends it to George Washington. And when you go to Mount Vernon, you'll see the key there, the key to the Bastille in the Mount Vernon Museum. So, there's Lafayette, and they appoint him. They think, he's great. He works with both sides so well. What could go wrong? And of course, Kernon, why not? Lafayette says, yes, I'll do it. I'll do it for France. And he becomes the commander of the National Guard. So he's controlling Paris. So he's trying to appease both sides, which we know never really works for too long. Bum, bum, bum. So he even takes the red in the revolutionaries. Their colors are red and blue, and the color of the Bourbon dynasty is white. So he takes them together. He puts the white in the middle as a way to kind of smooth things over, which is still the French flag today. And so he thinks, okay, we'll just, we'll incorporate these together. Well, no. The women are fed up. They have a bread riot, and they march all the way from Paris over 10 miles out to Versailles. So Lafayette heads out thinking, I gotta put this insurrection down. This cannot be tolerated. And then his own guards said, we're with them. Like, we're gonna revolt against you. So we thought, okay, I think I need to come up with another plan as I ride out there. So he gets out there. By the time he's out there, 2 of the guards have already lost their heads and they're on pikes. And there's the king upstairs hiding at Versailles and this mob of angry women. You don't want to mess with a mob of angry women, right? So he goes in and he talks to the king, and the king comes out on the balcony and is like, oh, I think all your ideas are so wonderful. Let's incorporate them all. And then the crowd says, long live the king, and everything's good. And then they volunteer to escort him to the Tuileries Palace in Paris. And escort is more like, if you don't come with us, we're going to chop your head off. So they escort him to Tuileries Palace, which is a great place to have as your own personal jail. But so that's where Louis XVI is. And things only escalate from there. It ends up being a huge, basically, riot on the Champ de Mars in Paris, a big field in downtown Paris. And Lafayette felt he had no choice but to try to break up the crowd. And when that didn't work, he ordered his men to fire on the crowd. So that is when his popularity plummeted. And it's funny, he's a zillion times more famous here in America than he is in France, and people remember that, of him firing on his fellow Frenchmen. So, which I always kind of thought that intriguing, is why is Lafayette a household name here, but in France he is really not. But when you order firing on your own people, I guess you lose a lot of supporters. So then the evil Robespierre of the Jacobins takes control, and this is what happens. It is just absolutely insane. And Lafayette is declared a traitor. So he's like, I am out of here. I do not want to meet Madame Guillotine. I am on my way out of here. And he starts racing to the border of Austria. Well, he makes it to Austria, but Austria's like, well, we're at war with France, so we're putting you in jail. So he ends up in jail in Austria for 5 years. And the Americans, tried to get out. Someone, I don't know, there was someone who commented on Facebook that Washington kept asking Jefferson to try to get him out, but Jefferson did not. And so there he is in jail. His long-suffering wife, Adrienne, comes and stays in jail with him and brings 2 of their daughters. They send their son, George Washington Lafayette, over to America, and he actually was at Mount Vernon for safety. So they are there in jail. His wife becomes very, very ill while they're there, and it ends up, her life is cut short. She survives it, but she doesn't last much longer. So while he's there, the news trickles in from France, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. Within 6 months, the king and the queen are executed. And 6 months later, the reign of terror kicks in. And 5 years later, though, there's a coup. And this amazing person arranges for Lafayette to be released. Anybody have any ideas who that is? Oh, there he is. I'm sorry, I didn't want to watch. There he is in jail. Napoleon. So there he is thinking, Napoleon is awesome. I love this guy. He got me out of jail. Nobody else got me out of jail. And so he's all in on Napoleon. And but then he quickly realizes that Napoleon is consumed with ambition and lust for power. And of course, Lafayette believes in the total opposite and is completely turned off. So George Washington passes away in 1999. Or I'm sorry, I'm still in the last millennium. In 1899, and 1799.
Okay, so Napoleon offers to Lafayette, would you like to be the ambassador to the United States? I mean, what a great job. He loves America, America loves him. He says no, because he doesn't believe in what Napoleon's doing with his absolute control. So another show of his incredible character. And he actually went ahead and started to speak out directly against Napoleon, threatening his reign as when Napoleon declares himself dictator of France. So there's Lafayette, always doing the right thing. Thomas Jefferson offers to make him the governor of Louisiana in 1803, and he says no. And he feels like he has to stay in France. Finally, Napoleon is overthrown, and Louis XVIII is put on the throne. So here, the irony is, Lafayette had, went through this whole revolution to try to get rid of all these Bourbon kings, but he figured this Bourbon king has got to be better than Napoleon. So he speaks out in support of the Bourbon king and over Napoleon, and Napoleon goes into exile. But then 100 days later, he is back, and once again, he ends up being the voice against Napoleon. And then Napoleon abdicates a second time, and the Bourbons are brought back onto the throne. And this is Louis XVIII. And then Lafayette realizes Louis XVIII is horrible too, and he starts speaking out against Louis XVIII. So Louis XVIII wants to get rid of him. And at this point, Lafayette must have been exhausted. Just this constant battle and just everything that he had been put through, and just kind of, wouldn't it be nice to go somewhere where everybody knows your name and everybody loves you and people appreciate what you did for them? So he gets a letter from President James Monroe, who actually helped him off the battlefield at Brandywine. So he gets a letter from James Monroe inviting him to come to America. Let's celebrate the 50th anniversary of the beginning of the American Revolution. And he's like, I am all in. So this is what he looks like in 1824 when he came over. So by this point, Adrian had passed away. So he had nothing but time on his hands. He was kind of like, I'm good, I'm coming. And I'm in no hurry to get back to France. So America turns out in the biggest way for him. There's 50,000 people in Times Square, which is way beyond the population, to greet him when he comes. And about at least 50 towns in America renamed their towns after Lafayette when he came. I mean, he was a rock star before there were rock stars. Absolutely incredible. So, here he had his own stamp, and here there were special coins for him, a special fan with his portrait on there that the ladies all carried. There were gloves that women wore with his picture on them. There were, all kinds of china, which I'm sure is very expensive on eBay right now. So he was the most popular guy around, and he loved every minute of it. So the joke is that he did not turn down a single dinner invitation. So he was originally only coming for a few months and ended up staying for about 18 months. And he made his way, went to all states of the Union, all 24 states, all the way from Maine to Louisiana. And I actually have a friend from France who, here he is arriving, who is doing, putting up signs in every place where Lafayette stopped. And the fanfare was just amazing. And then, like in Williamsburg, people were putting their oriental rugs out in the street so that Lafayette would not have to ride over the dirt. He would ride over their oriental rug as they came into town. So, and he was very much an abolitionist from the get-go, and was always after the founding fathers about getting rid of slavery. So he saw James Armistead, who was a spy in Susanna's Midnight Ride, but a double spy who helped Lafayette with, was crucial as a double spy during the Battle of Yorktown. So he saw James Armistead in the crowd, stopped his carriage, got out, and hugged him in front of everyone. And at that point, poor James Armistead had been, he did not get a stipend that the soldiers got because they said, well, you weren't a soldier, you were just a spy. It's just insane. So Lafayette saw to that, wrote him a letter, and at that point, James Armistead was freed and received a stipend and took on the last name of Lafayette. So he went by James Armistead Lafayette after that. So, amazing story. So, he finally decides to go home. And meanwhile, he grabs some dirt at Bunker Hill. Like, eventually, I know I've had more lives than a cat. Eventually, I'm going to pass away. I'm bringing some of the dirt from Bunker Hill so that when I do pass away, that I can be buried in that. So there he is, age 72. It's 1830. It's time for another revolution. Why not? Kernon, why not? It's called the July Revolution. And this is the revolution when Les Mis, watching that, that's what Les Mis is set during this time period. So at this point, King Charles X takes control. He dissolves the entire National Assembly. He gets rid of free press. And basically every improvement that was ever made is taken away. And he basically becomes a dictator as well. So Lafayette ends up supporting Louis Philippe, and he goes out on the balcony and gives him a kiss on the cheek. So everyone's like, okay, we'll have Louis Philippe as the king now. And but then of course he ends up being a huge disappointment. And Lafayette, despite his age, he leads the opposition to him, and Louis Philippe is not happy, to say the least. So he finally passes away a couple of years ago. He's married next to his wife in Paris with the dirt he gathered from Bunker Hill, but Louis Philippe would not allow any eulogies at his funeral, and basically just had armed guards when he was buried. So basically he was not allowed any kind of funeral in France. But in the US, President Andrew Jackson gave him the same honors as George Washington with a state funeral and all of that. And National Day of Mourning, congressmen wore black for 30 days. There was black bunting all over the Capitol. People wore mourning badges. And John Quincy Adams later on gave a 3-hour eulogy in his honor. So really amazing. And here he is on his deathbed. Which I doubt was quite so glamorous, but I guess when you're a painter, you want to glam it up. And here he is. That's his gravestone next to his wife. And so let's see. So his legacy is absolutely incredible. World War I, when we got involved, the first thing the American soldiers did was go to his grave and pick this cemetery and say, Lafayette, we are here for you. It's just absolutely amazing. General Eisenhower was there as well. And he was part of our dedication on D-Day to liberating France was the debt that we owed to Lafayette. And his legacy in the Declaration of Rights of Man lives on to this day. And it's still part of the French Constitution. So absolutely amazing. And in 2002, he was made an honorary U.S. citizen. So his legacy lives on, and it's also been helped quite a bit by Hamilton. So that's what I have for right now.